Hey everyone, welcome to the UnStuckable show, where we discuss the habits, skills, and knowledge to get unstuck, get on track, and learn about ourselves to reach our goals. My guest today has an amazing life story for us to learn from. His name's S.L. Young. He's gone from being asked to leave high school in the 10th grade to writing over 13 different publications and helping lots of people get unstuck along the way. I'm excited to hear his story and learn his tips for getting unstuck today. Hey S.L., how are you, man?
Hey, Chris, how you doing?
I'm good. It's great to meet you, and can't wait to hear about your career story.
All right, it sounds good, but not SL. Call me Sly. That's what everybody calls me.
All right, awesome. You never know with the S.L, but I like it, Sly. So where does your career story start? I know you've got an awesome one.
My career story started. I started working a long time ago and doing restaurant work, and then I did my time over at Chuck E. Cheese, and unfortunately I did the mouse too. And then I ended up at a couple of hotels working in auditing, and so that was my real first experience into the corporate world.
How old were you when your first job?
Oh my gosh, I was like 15 because 15, 8 months or something like that. I needed to have money and I wasn't getting enough at home. So I needed to go find something where I could get some income, right?
I love it. I have to tell you, both Stephen and I, my co-host Stephen Worley, if you listen to any of the shows going back over the past 150 episodes, we've asked that question quite a bit. And we both judge people a little bit if they say that their first job was after 21. I really think that it is people that are unstuckable, they start working early.
Yeah, I don't know if that's a connection or not, but I know that I had some dreams and goals and desires early, and money was the key to get it. When you're young, you're a teenager, and you want to do dating and going out and movies and videos, you need money. And if your parents aren't giving you what you need, you got to go out and find another way.
I like it, man. I like it. Awesome. So where did I've read into your bio a little bit, but it sounds like being asked to leave high school. I mean, you've come a really long way, and frankly, I'm jealous of your ability to write as much as you do, and hone in on that as a skill set. How did you go from being, you mentioned it in there that you were asked to leave high school in 10th grade to where you are today. How did that happen?
Well, it wasn't an overnight journey. It was a very, very, very long journey. The first step on the process was having someone who came into my life unexpectedly in the terms of a high school principal that was on me all the time. I was trying to avoid her. She was trying to get closer, and we clashed. And I really didn't respect what she was trying to do for me. Unfortunately, it wouldn't take me until many, many, many years later to sort of figure out what she was actually trying to do. But once I realized that I was on the verge of being put out of school and thinking about my future just a little bit, and maybe a little bit the embarrassment of being kicked out of school too, I started to turn things around. I changed schools, got in a new environment, and I said the things that I was doing before weren't working, so let me try something new. And then I found that by trying these new activities, doing like Future Business Leaders of America, forensics, which is a speaking competition, track and field, not only was I meeting a lot of people, I was having a lot of fun. And so it was a different outlet versus hanging out and partying and doing bad things and not going to school. So that was sort of the beginning of that journey.
And how old were you back then?
The real change started right around 17.
Okay. All right. So then how did that get you to where you are today? Did you got into these different activities and everything? And then when did you get into writing?
Well, writing wasn't until many, many years later, so I'll sort of fill in the gap real quick. So what happened was my senior year of high school, I barely graduated. I crawled over the finish line. I actually didn't know if I was going to graduate on the day that I was graduating, with my parents and family showing up for graduation. So I found out just right before graduation that I was cleared. Wow. So that was crazy in itself. And then I decided that I was going to go to college, even though my high school counselor said to me that I shouldn't bother applying for college because I wouldn't get in. And so I went to a local college, started to do well, had a problem with a professor. And, I was trying my best, had a problem with the windshield wiper. That's a different story. Got there, ended up being unable to take the final exam, and ended up failing the class because of my grade point average prior to that. Left that institution after that, went to another school, did even worse because I was trying to take distance learning when I shouldn't have been. And then I ended up having at least 2 semesters with a zero point 0 average. And then I walked away. And then fortunately, when you were asking me earlier about my corporate career, I ended up at a nice Fortune 500 company doing well there and didn't understand the connection between being able to do well in this corporate environment and not being able to do well at work. But what I did know is that folks around me were getting ready to do a master's program at the American University. And in knowing their story and what they were about to do, I don't know what it was. Well, I do. It's my drive. I went over to American University, had a conversation with their admissions office that here's my story. I've been a horrible student. Folks I'm working with are going here. The corporation is willing to pay for my tuition. What can I do to get in? And fortunately, the person that was there didn't judge me, said, you can't get in the front door, but what you can do is take some classes non-degree, and if you maintain a 3.0 average, you can get in.
Wow. So that's the carrot, the competitive carrot that you needed to instigate you to get into school and do that?
Yep.
Wow. That's awesome. I guess what tips do you have then for someone who might have gone through a similar career story where, I mean, first I would love to know, why do you think you ever weren't on track to begin with?
Well, I'm going to take the first question first that you started with. So what I would tell folks is get off your butt and stop complaining and try and do something. That's where it starts. Simply right
Thumbs
there.
up, man. I love it. I totally agree.
I mean, so that's where it starts. And I'm sorry, ask that second question again.
Well, why do you think back when you were younger and then again and after high school, why do you think you ever got off track to begin with?
Well, in high school, the first time that I started to get off track is in junior high. Probably it was in 8th grade. And a friend of mine was, actually a girl I liked. She had some drugs. And I took the drugs from her. We had a confrontation. I told her she shouldn't be taking drugs. It was stupid. And what ended up happening is she got busted for the drugs, even though she didn't have them. She told that I had them, and I didn't have them the next day when I was in school. And even though I didn't have them, I said, yes, I had them because I took them from her. I got 5 days out of school suspension. She didn't get anything.
Wow.
So at that point, it was a change in my mindset because when I got back to school, I had a different persona. So now I wasn't the squeaky clean kid. I was the kid that was edgy. And that sort of gives you that elevated status, unfortunately, in school, which allowed me to connect with that. In some ways, I wasn't getting that sort of attention at home. So that gave me that additional attention. But I think the other biggest challenge was if I was trying to do all the things right and wasn't getting any attention, but yet I get punished for doing what it should have been a good thing. Well, I said, well, fine, I'm going to live up to the expectation. And then I started running with a different crowd.
Wow. And then did that change when you left high school and tried to get into college? I mean, it sounds like you get really motivated when somebody tells you can't do something. So you try to do it.
Well, you might be right in that. But just to take a step back again, another important point is in high school, the other thing that held me back was, and I'm really starting to, I'm about to start writing about this, is that it's the way that our educational system is structured. And it's a one approach fits all, and one approach fits all does not fit everyone. And frankly, I was bored in school. And because I was bored in school, I acted out. And no one ever asked me, what can we do to get you encouraged to move into a different direction? And so one of the things that I've learned as a college professor now is I pay attention to my students. I know my students. And I've actually moved away from a lot of testing because how many times have you heard anyone say that they're in the corporate environment and then all of a sudden someone says to them, Friday at 2:00, please bring your Scantron and your number 2 pencil. And we're going to give you a test where you memorize everything and you can't look at any resources. Where does that ever happen?
Right. It never happens.
It doesn't. And so what we need to be able to do is connect with individuals using our emotional intelligence on a personal level by calling on individuals by name, because that creates a personal connection with the individuals. And then you can figure out what works. So I can tell you from my experiences, I know my students by name. My classrooms are collaborative. Also, in addition to my classrooms being collaborative, the students tell me that it was a great experience because now they know each other. Because a lot of times we sit in these college classrooms for 16 weeks and don't know anybody in there, and we're spending all that time together. Come on, we've got to change the model. Everybody does not learn the same, and we need to figure out, as professors, as educators, as counselors, as whatever, how to motivate the students where they are and reach them the way they need it to be reached.
I want to learn about you today, but you just hit on an awesome subject, and that was emotional intelligence. And Stephen and we are there with you. I'm just picking up the book Emotional Intelligence here on my desk, by Daniel Goleman. And I guess because you mentioned that, what's the value? You brought it up, so I would love to know, like, what is the value to you of emotional intelligence in education and in success? Have you read about it? Do you have a perspective on it?
I have only read a little bit about it, but I'm a human being. You're a human being. We're emotional creatures, whether we like it or not. And what I've learned through experiential knowledge in the classroom is that once I started calling on my students by name, by learning their names on the first day of class, there was a different experience. The other thing that I am aware of is that I tell my students this on the first day of class is that don't move, don't twitch, don't have any facial expressions at all, because even though I'm standing up here, I'm constantly scanning the classroom, and I look at everybody in the eye. So if I see something that looks like a question, because what I tell my students is, you might not realize this, but we have lights that come up on our face. There's a big question mark that comes on your face. So if I see something that looks like a question mark, I might say, John, you have a question?
Wow.
And so that's being emotionally intelligent, by paying attention through observation.
Right. Absolutely. And I think that I agree. I think you see that in business a lot. As someone that didn't go to college, I went to a year's worth of school, but then did very well in sales and working in startups. I found that there was an incredible value to, once I got past the educational barrier, improve my success on a team and the ability to work with a team and help others achieve their goals, that emotional intelligence part of communication really became a really valuable tool in my toolkit. So that's why it's part of our 10 books for learning about yourself series with UnStuckable. We're reading 10 different books, and one of those books is Emotional Intelligence by Daniel Goleman.
Well, that's great. And let me just add this real quick before we move on. And one of the other things that I'm going to start harping on soon is this crazy idea that everybody needs to go to school to get a college degree to be successful. Everybody doesn't need to go to school to be successful, because that isn't the path for everyone. And actually, I don't think I would have been as successful as I am today and all the things that I've accomplished if I had gone to college first. So by going into the workplace and learning that experiential knowledge, when I went into the classroom, I had a better perspective on why it was important, because otherwise I wouldn't even have understood why the things that I was being taught were important, and then I would have had to relearn it in the workplace anyway. So sorry, I just had to hit that point.
Well, I think I agree with you. I think that's another thing that, we're hitting on a lot of things here, but Stephen and I really, I think we both believe with UnStuckable that learning in the traditional education sense, you first learn and then do. But in reality, when it comes to application and working in the real world, you have to the lines between doing and learning are really blurred, right? And that ability to learn while doing, do while learning is an acquired skill, right? To be able to understand how to find information versus just memorize information.
Ding, ding, ding. And to take it a step further, one of the things that I reinforce in my classroom is that we cannot just teach business terminology. We've got to teach life and business. Business equals life. And then there's an integration strategy. We need to build the whole individual, not teach folks to memorize. They need to understand critical thinking and how to connect the dots. We need to scrub a lot of the way that we're teaching. I'm not saying it works in every subject and every curriculum, but in a lot of the curriculums, especially in business, I think we need to scrub the way we're doing it and have more hands-on application and thinking outside of the books. See, now you're getting me all.
Let's do it, man. Let's talk about that today, because I think. We do say let's get unstuck, right? Or we're called unstuckable, but I think one thing we've learned is a large percentage of our listeners aren't stuck right now. They just want to do better, right? It's about personal development. It's about understanding that you have a growth mindset and you want to do better in the future. You want to achieve your goals. And a big thing for us is learning about yourself. and learning about yourself, not just in terms of your strengths, like you might do in business. You might take a strengths finder test, but learning about yourself from the perspective of emotional intelligence, of fear and how you handle fear, of your the clutter in your life, the physical clutter and things that you keep around you, right? How you handle your emotions. And then another one that we were just talking today with Pamela Slim this morning about telling your career story and your body of work. All of these are different skills. So I would love to dive in with you today on what you think your tips are. I mean, that's kind of coming full circle, right?
Yeah, and I think first, since you've been rattling off a few books, I mean, two of the books that I highly recommend for my students, and I even give extra credit for, one is StrengthsFinder 2.0 by Tom Rath. I do enjoy that book and having students to analyze themselves through that book. I also recommend Fight Your Fear and Win by Don Green, PhD.
Cool.
I really enjoy that book also because fear is something that's very powerful. So what I say in some of my work is that fear can either hold one back or inspire one to reach greatness. And it's a choice in terms of what we want to do. And the other thing that I would add quickly is that one of the other things that I write in my work is in order to, a lot of times folks are like, well, how do I make the change? How do I turn and head towards a new direction? I want to do something different, but I just don't know how. Well, I basically boil it down to this. Change who you are by determining who or what you want to be. So a lot of times folks are running towards something and they don't even know what they're running towards because someone said that that's the direction you should head, or I think it's an interesting idea. And so what's helped me to be able to do all of the things that I'm doing right now is I understand who or what I want to be. And that's how I change who I am today to become the individual I want to be tomorrow.
It sounds a lot like focusing on your strengths as opposed to your weaknesses.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things that we need to move away from because we tell folks, all right, you're not good at this. Go spend more time on this. No, absolutely not. Why should I waste my time working on something that I might not ever be good at?
This is awesome, man. I mean,
Right.
I'm just smiling over here because you're like, I remember these things. I mean, being taught in high school that, if you're not good at this subject, to just put an incredible amount of mental energy into trying to get better at that. When I agree, right? Like, I think it's important to be at a proficient level to be able to keep up with the rest, the average group in society, right? Like if there's a limiter that's stopping you from even keeping up with life, then you should get to that level. But at a certain point, I think focusing on your weaknesses becomes a much larger force reducer to focusing on your strengths, right? Where if you put your mental energy into your strengths, it helps you in all other areas.
All right, so I'm not trying to do a bunch of buzzwords, but I have a lot of little sayings that
Let's
I use.
do it, man. I'm not going to complain.
So one of the things I actually was telling folks in this keynote address I was giving last night, and I don't like to do speeches. I like to do discussions. I like to have interactive settings. And so what I told them, individuals won't do anything until they're ready to tee off. And that is they're ready to use their time, energy, and effort on fulfilling fantasies or otherwise dreams.
I'm loving it, man. Because for Steven and I, we've constantly talked about aligning your limited resources around your limited time, energy, and money. So the limited resources of time, energy, and money. So could you explain that a little bit more? Like what do you mean by teeing off?
Well, a lot of times we have a lot of choices that we can make at any point in time in terms of how we want to use our time. So if I take it a little bit differently and just give you another one of my expressions, and that being do things when the mind is dedicated and not when time is allocated. So a lot of times we do things when time is allocated, but we're not really dedicated. So, for example, there's a lot of times, I have a laundry list of articles that I want to write. So I'll be driving along in the shower or whatever, and I'll say, let me go write, add this to my list. So I have in my Internet Explorer a folder for each article that I plan to write at some point in the future. So I have all these ideas that are being juggled in my head, and then all of a sudden I could be walking along Or unfortunately for me, a lot of times it's like 2:30 in the morning or 3 o'clock in the morning when I'm like dead tired, and then my brain isn't really thinking, and it's just allowing it to flow. Then I get this thing that says, "You know that article you were thinking about 3 months ago? Now." And then I go to the computer and I start writing, and I don't edit. I just write. I don't. So one of the things that I've also learned to do, and I know I'm grouping a lot of stuff in here, but
That's
another
awesome,
thing
man.
that I've learned to do is to shut down my brain and not to overthink. And I push, part of that is being able to push your ego to the side, because our ego even gets in the way even when we're writing. Well, this isn't good. This could be better.
Yeah.
I shut that down, and I allow myself to go into the zone, and that zone allows me to write freely. And then after I've put everything down that I want, because you don't want to interrupt that flow, because when you get into those moments of flow, sometimes it can be difficult to get in and out of them. So you just go and go and go. And then when you think you have everything down that you want, stop and then go back and edit later. It's so much easier that way.
I mean, I think that strategy correlates to a lot of things in life, not just the creative process of writing, but of trying out anything, right? I mean, if you are working as an employee in a business and then one day you get an inspiration to go to work on this, you've been thinking about doing something for a long time, and then one day you want to do it, but you don't, and you stop yourself because it's not the right time, right? And you go and you want to wait for the right time and the right place to execute and do that thing, you lose that inspiration moment, right? And then it's so difficult to get that back, to get that chance to be creative or to do that thing or to execute on that thing, whether it's writing or starting a business or going to get your degree or learn something new, any of those chances. So I mean, that's a really meaningful thing to me. And I remember when we first met, you mentioned that to me, and I've really tried to keep that, to implement that in the past 2 weeks in my own writing, because writing is something that's difficult for me. But I now have a nice folder of lots of things that are halfway finished. But at least I just put down that thought, right, and I can go back and edit later.
All right, so I'm going to go a little deeper on you.
Yeah,
And,
let's do it.
so some folks might think this is crap, but hey, it is what it is. The other thing that I've learned to do is to listen to the universe. And so different folks can interpret it this however they want. They could say they're listening to the universe. It's their guardian angel. It's a spirit. It's some divine intervention that's happening. But what I've learned to do, and I think we're just on the doorstep of what we can do in terms of our mental capacity. But what I've learned to do is to shut down the noise. And when I'm having those moments of quiet, it could be in my car with the radio off, but a lot of times it's when I'm in the shower and you're not thinking about anything else. And I'll stand there with the water just on the base of my neck, close my eyes, and then just allow the thoughts to come in. And then there's a lot of times you get these random thoughts about things. You're like, where did that come from? I don't take those as random thoughts anymore. I go write them down because there's a reason that random thought came into my head, because I am starting to have a lot more conversations with folks because I'm curious about it.
Right.
And I'll say, have you ever had a moment when you were doing something and you're like, man, I should go do this. And then you didn't do it. And then you're like, man, I wish I would have done that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've had those experiences also, but now I realize that it's more to this, and there's more to this universe than we can ever imagine. But there's something that's driving us to think it at a moment when we're not thinking it. So I write it down, even if I don't understand it at that moment, and then come back and think about it later.
I mean, it's you get me at the point of writing down, and that's where you start to really tie in, because it is. I think it's hard. It's hard for people to exist in a space that is, I'm listening to the universe, right? But when you bring it to that point of saying, I write down this thought and I put it in a journal, I remember it. I mean, that to me is where it really starts to tie in to be a real exercise or an activity or a habit that does allow you or gives you some edge or allows you to make use of those thoughts. I mean, it's why I'm doing Unstuckable. I mean, I think that there's something to mindfulness. I think there's something to being quiet and slowing down and paying attention to the thoughts that you're having and using your aligning your energy around the things that you want to get done. I love what you said there, not around the time that's allocated, But what was it? What was your statement? It was,
So don't do something when time is allocated. Wait until the mind is dedicated.
I love it.
Because why waste your time if you're not ready to do it?
I mean, I totally agree. I mean, do you even believe in writer's block?
No.
Of course not.
I'm sorry. I just,
No.
I've heard this so many times. And I think blocks, we create our own blocks because we go to the computer. See, so this is what I think. We go to the computer, we get out our little notebook, and we're like, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to write because I've dedicated, and I've heard some writers do this, and I don't agree with it. They'll say, I've dedicated 10 to 12 today, and I'm going to write. And every day from 10 to 12, I'm going to write. Mm-hmm. Well, do you think your brain is going to magically turn on every day at 10 to 12 for you to be able to write? And I think that that's where the challenges come in. So what I do is when I'm in a mood that I might be interested in writing and I have an idea and it feels like my mind is ready to connect with the message that I want to deliver, then I write. If not, I do something else.
But do you notice if you analyze the times that you do, are there times of the day? Do you have routines? Are there things that happen or fall into place for you? Like, do you keep up with some kind of schedule by accident?
No. What I actually have found, and again, this is another thing that I'm curious about. I am finding that we have to learn to shut down the noise. And so where I am the most productive is when I am the most exhausted. Because I'm not allowing myself to think all these random thoughts and get distracted. Because when I'm exhausted,
cannot agree with you more.
I'm focused. Because you know that you only have a certain amount of energy, and then your mind is like, I got to get this done, and this is all I can focus on because I'm tired.
I hate to say it, but I have had some of my best days with UnStuckable when I am hungover from a creative perspective, or when it is late at night and I've got a long. I love calls. I love conversations. I love learning from people and talking like we are right now. But it can be tiring after 5 or 6 hours of doing that. But that's the time when I'm sitting on the sofa and I'm not listening to the TV. I don't have the TV on and I'm just, right? And that's a great time to write because I don't want to look at any other websites, right? I don't want to open up anything else on my computer. So I think it's neat that you've opened up to that because there is no wrong answer, right? And there's a lot of people out there prescribing their way to create this habit or this routine.
And I think that that's what's wrong. I don't think you should tell anybody how to do it. You tell them to find a way that works for them. Mm-hmm. And let me just give you a quick example. So when I first started writing, when I wrote my first book and I was researching a bunch of folks who were writing books and finding out about them and like, man, I want to be that overnight sensation. Obviously, I haven't been yet.
And how many books have you written?
Well, hold on. This is part of the story. So one of the things that I read was this one author said as part of his creative process, and I don't remember his name, he said he created the cover of his book and put it on his desk in front of him. So then it wasn't that he was writing an entire book. He was writing a chapter or an addition to a book that was already there.
He was filling a book.
Right. So it's a different mentality. For me, my style is to outline and then write to an outline. And so what I do to maximize my time, and I've learned to control my mental processing. I could be at the barbershop and I have a folder that has some things that I need to write. And when I'm sitting there waiting to get my hair cut, I start writing about something I have in my folder. So I'm maximizing my time.
Right.
But only if my mind is dedicated to the process of writing and I can concentrate it in those moments.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I can hear people listening to this and thinking, well, this guy gets to do this because he does this full time. He has control over his schedule and what he wants. What would you say to that?
We all have control over our schedule and what we want, right? So it's all about choices. But I mean, writing is not just the one thing that I do. I mean, I write, I go out and I do inspirational talks. I go out to businesses and do training sessions. I'm a professor. I've started a nonprofit. I go into a local jail and I teach inmates about business life and soft skills. In January, I just launched another business, taking all the things that I'm doing and bringing them into the commercial setting. I am putting together a script right now. So I've learned to maximize my time. You will allocate your time to the things that you believe are important. There are a lot of things that I could be doing that are time wasters, and I've done plenty of that in the past. But so, the shift for me was years ago when I was depressed. I was trying to figure things out, and that dealing with that depression and starting to write helped to focus my mind, because I could have easily picked up a bottle, picked up a joint, picked up other drugs to deal with it. And legal drugs, if you need to use them, are fine. Or if you need to go talk to someone and that works for you, that's fine. None of those things work for me because I know me. So I went inside and started writing. And as I started writing, I found that it did something for me. It helped focus me and center me. And then I just continued to write. And so when I started on my writing journey, if somebody would have said, 2.5 years from now, you would have written, you will write 13 books, different publications. You will be a blogger on Huffington Post and have written 40 articles, and you would have done all these other things. I would have said, you're smoking crack. But I've learned from these experiences. And then last year, I don't like to say the day that I almost committed suicide, which was on 3/11/14. I'm coming up on the 1 year of that date. And, what I like to say now is it's the 1 year anniversary of my awakening, because I have done more, especially from March until December of last year. I consider myself reborn because, again, it's about a choice. So on the day that I was about to commit suicide, I wasn't planning or thinking about suicide. I woke up that morning, and this is the thing that folks sometimes don't understand, because you hear sometimes folks say, how could so-and-so have committed suicide? I didn't see that. They seem to be so happy. Well, first of all, a lot of us hide what's going on inside because we don't want to share it with you because of pride, because of ego, because of fear, because of a lot of other things that we shouldn't be thinking about. But fortunately, I cared about something more than myself, which is my mother. So I reached out to my brother. And in the moments that I was falling apart, but I was just calling him to say, I just want you to make sure that you're going to take care of our mother, because I do it now if I wasn't here anymore. And I started to break down. And then he kept asking questions, and I hung up the phone, and he kept calling back. And, it was a long process. And then he got to me and he said, look, Stacy, you're going through a moment. It's just a moment. But then after having that conversation with him and then my sister, and starting to come back towards reality, because we go into it was very interesting how in a matter of hours after opening my eyes, I went into a very deep, dark psychosis where I heard the voice of the devil, I believe, saying, do it, do it, do it. And that's someplace I've never been before. And I wasn't even thinking about it. And to be in that spot is still foreign to me. But that explains and the reason that I shared my story, and I write extensively about depression and suicide on my blog on Huffington Post to help educate others about it, to let folks know this can happen that quickly. Your body can break down and you are exhausted. Your mind can break down. But with all of that said, for me, I made a choice to fight, because once I came back to my senses and tried to regroup, 3 or 4 hours later, I got up and I went to the jail to teach inmates just like I had done any other time. And I think that one choice was the reason that prevented me from getting stuck. And that was the first step to getting unstuck.
Wow. And was that the major transition point or crisis in your life? Or had other things happened that led you to that?
I've had a lot of different moments in my life that I've had to step back and, regroup and figure out what I needed to do. But for me, and another reason that I write about ethics and workplace bullying, when I went into consulting, I dealt with a lot of bad people that were unethical and that were bullies in the workplace. And dealing with that, taking care of a mom, and part of that time, my mom was in a nursing home because she fell and broke her hip. So I was trying to do that in the daytime, then go to work, managing these multi-million-dollar projects with hundreds of people working on these initiatives, and then go back to the nursing home to work on my mom, and then trying to live my life, and then trying to do teaching and trying to do all these other things. It's only natural that folks at a certain point will break. And then dealing with one scenario back in 2012 that caused me to leave a job, and the worst bullying I've ever experienced, where it was just constant harassment from a senior manager telling me I was stupid, that I didn't know what I was talking about, I didn't have the qualification. I mean, it was just a lot of different stuff, and not getting the support. After everything else I was dealing with, I just broke. But it wasn't right then, but it was after, things didn't happen for me. And then over a period of time, then I just broke down. And when someone's under a lot of pressure, a lot of bad things can happen. And that's when we need to make sure that we reach out to our support system. And even if you don't have your own support system, there's always someone who's there to assist. There's National Suicide Hotline, and there's other places. So there's a lot of different things. And going back to our conversation earlier, just to explain this just a little bit more, again, I believe the universe put some things in front of me. So bear with me a little bit, because I'm going to tell you a story. It's a little long, but it's very important and relevant to my story and my journey, and how I was able to turn it around in less than a year and go out and talk about this and write about this and share my journey and help others. So after my awakening, I had a conversation from a friend from high school, just contacted me out of the blue. Well, actually, I have to back up a little bit because this is crazy. So in February of last year, someone contacted me out of the blue who had seen my work on my website and asked me if I wanted to come speak at a healthy living series. And I said, sure. And I said, what do you want me to talk about? She said, it's up to you. And I said, how about belief? And I didn't know where I pulled that from. I had never written or spoken or discussed belief with anyone.
Wasn't on your list?
Wasn't on my list.
Wow.
And some of the stuff that I'm going to tell throughout the story, folks can believe it or not, but this is what happened. So about 2 weeks after that, I walked into my kitchen and I heard, "You have little faith." And then a couple of days later, or a week later, I heard, "You were chosen." 2 weeks after that, I almost committed suicide. Again, my awakening. A week and 1 day after my near suicide, I was standing in front of a group giving one of the most important presentations of my life, because I was presenting that presentation on belief that I was asked to do, that presentation I was asked to do that I didn't even know I was going to do on belief a little bit over a month earlier. And now I'm standing in front of a crowd. And the reason that my cameraman said that he felt something different that day, and I said that is also when I walked out, is because I was standing in front of a crowd, but I was trying to convince myself to believe. And so if anybody wants to watch that presentation, it's on my website.
Yeah,
so they can go out there. But there's a little bit more, so bear with me for just a moment, because these are all important elements. So then I decided I was going to write my story. And so I wrote my book, Choosing to Take a Stand, Changed Me, My Life, and My Destiny. I called my sister as I was getting ready to start writing it, and I said, I'm going to write this book because I think there's a book by Viktor Frankl. Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning. Mm-hmm. And I think he wrote in that book that he wrote that entire book in like 48 hours or something like that. So I was like, well, if he can do that, because I am competitive, so I was like, if he can do that, then I can do that. So I said, that's not realistic with everything that's going on. I said, I'm going to write the book in a month. And then 2 weeks later, I called my sister and I said, I'm done. She's like, you're done? I was like, yeah, I'm done. I said, I don't know what it is, but I felt like there was something like behind me and I was just typing. Well, mind you, I had just finished another book on ethics called Ethical Opportunity Cost. And when I wrote that book and I was looking through it after I wrote it, and some of the stuff in there, I said, who wrote this? And I knew that I wrote it, but I didn't remember. And I was like, who wrote this? Well, here's where it starts to get a little weird and crazy. So, one, I was flipping through the channels at my mom's house, and I happened to see this program. And this program was Super Soul Sunday with Oprah, and Stephen Pressfield, I believe, was on there. And I think he's the author of the book, The Art of War. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't going to be able to finish it. I said, let me record this. And I ran home, and I watched it later. And one of the things that he said during that interview, because Oprah likes to ask folks the heart-to-heart questions towards the end. She's like, well, what are your thoughts about God? How do you know that you're in the presence of God? And he said, he knows that he was in the presence of God, or in those moments of flow, when he pushed his ego aside and he looked back at his work and he's like, who wrote that? And I was like, huh? I just said that to my sister. So then I come back home and I was dead tired again, finished my book, getting ready to go lay down, and I heard the word happiness. I'm like, happiness? I'm like, happiness? How am I going to write about happiness? Because I have to interpret what I hear. And I'm like, how am I going to go write about happiness? And I'm dead tired and I was going to go lay down. And then I said, no, go to your computer. And then an hour and a half later, I wrote about 10 pages. I don't know the exact number roughly. And those 10 pages are in the last chapter of that book. And the last chapter of the book is happiness isn't what I expected it to be. But hold on, this is a little bit more.
I am with you, man.
Okay.
I am not stopping you.
And you can see the rest of this documented. So in May, this is a couple of months after I almost committed suicide, my awakening, I wrote to Maya Angelou. And I don't remember the exact words right now, but you can go search my tweets. And I basically said to her, how does someone allow the writer to fully emerge? It was a little bit more complex than that, but that's basically what I asked. She passed away maybe 3 weeks later. I think 2.5 weeks before she passed away, she sent a tweet out. Even though it wasn't sent to me directly, I believe it was in response to the question that I asked. Because I asked her, how does someone allow that writer in them to fully emerge? And what she said, loosely paraphrased, was this. And this is her final tweet. Listen to yourself, and in those moments of quietude, you might hear the voice of God. And so that goes back to the things that I've been telling you, how I'm learning to listen to myself in the universe. And where I'm going to end this story, because I don't want to go too much further, but what I will tell you is this. In August, after Robin Williams committed suicide, I saw a post on Facebook. And someone who was a friend of a friend wrote, how could someone like that just throw their life away? And when I heard that, I was like, I need to respond. So I wrote a Facebook response, and this is documented on my Huffington Post. You can, I think it's my very first post. And what happened was, I wrote back and said, sometimes you just don't know what somebody else is going through. Mm-hmm. And so I soft disclosed because I didn't want to tell my story. And then the next day, I went full in, and I told everybody that I was moments from committing suicide, and I told my whole story. And what's also interesting is around that time, like a week before, I contacted a host, Maggie Linton, on the Maggie Linton Show, and asked her if I could come back on the show. And then she hadn't gotten back to me. Maybe it was a couple weeks earlier. She called me like the day after I posted that and said, do you want to come back on my show? And I said, yeah, but we can do something happy or something darker. And then she said, what do you have in mind? I said, I want to tell my story, what's just happened to me. Because I've written the book. I'm about to release it. I have to tell it at some point. I went on her show, and it was the first time that I told anyone publicly. I don't recommend going on a national syndicated show and telling your story, but I told my story about my journey. And in the middle of that interview, because it was the first time I was actually describing it out loud, if you listen to the interview, and it's on my website as well, you could hear in the middle of the interview, I all of a sudden I go, whoa, 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 because I was about to become extremely emotional. And then I made it through the interview. And that was the best thing that I could do, because I released the thing that I was most concerned about, was folks finding about what had happened to me. So anyway, long story, but important.
Very important. And I guess my follow-up to it is, thank you for sharing it. And then also for for the people in our listeners and in the community, what do you do if you're in a period of your life, maybe you're drifting, to steal a term from Outwitting the Devil, or maybe you are stuck and you don't have that crisis. You don't have that huge moment. Do you think can you create one yourself?
Absolutely. One of the things that I write about in my series of inspirational quotes is that, and these are some of the life lessons that I've learned, because in my series, It's a Crazy World, Learn from It. What I do is I've taken all these experiences that I've had and I've packaged it into a series. So one of the things that I directly write about is don't wait until your back is against the wall. And so now so let me take a step back. Before, I was living my life on happenstance. Now I'm living my life on purpose. So going back to what I said earlier, change who you are by determining who or what you want to be. Now I know who and what I want to be. And for the first time in my life, I'm happy with me.
So if you're living your life on happenstance, as you say, and you want to transition to living your life in purpose, how do you do it?
It's just making a choice. Change who you are by determining who or what you want to be. So it's writing that plan for yourself. So I said, well, and so I'm going to tell a really, really quick story. And so
Just
what
before you
happens?
jump into there,
Yeah,
I want to add one piece that I've
yeah.
heard from you and that I
Okay.
feel like I've learned from you. And that's also to slow down and listen
Yes.
and clean things out. And it seems like at certain points in your story, you have had the ability to not do more of whatever the happenstance is, not make
Hmm.
yourself more busy. But it sounds like you have, maybe you've learned this, maybe you do it without thinking about it, but it sounds like you have kind of purged or cleaned out what you're into so that you can find that thing. So that thing that is important to you comes to the surface. Would you agree with that?
And that, yes, I do agree. And that also includes divorcing friends.
Wow.
I
Awesome.
started to divorce friends.
Tell me
And
about it.
one of my best friends, we had been friends for over 10 years. And one day I woke up and I said, I need to have a conversation with him. And I had a conversation that said, we have been really good friends for a long time, but we're at different points in our life. And unfortunately, we're going in different directions and we can no longer be friends because it was just bringing too much drama to me. And I said, I wish you all the best, but we just can no longer be friends. And so that was understanding that we have all this noise that happens and clearing out the noise. And so I try to maintain folks that are in my environment that are positive because I don't have time. Life is too short for any of that negativity. But the thing that I was starting to say earlier, the thing that actually helped me a lot was as I started writing all my different stories, because I have a lot of different stories. And so the thing that helped me a lot was I had a student, actually I had two students in one of my classes, two separate classes. One of them came to me one night, and it's interesting, it was like within days apart. One guy, big burly guy, came up to me and started telling me, hey, I'm not doing well in the class. What can I do? I thought he was just giving me this normal story from a student who doesn't want to work. And then he started crying. And then I ended up spending like 3 hours with him after class. And he was telling me about his story and how he was on the verge of going to jail. Then I had another student who came to me and said, Sly, I might not be back. I might be going to jail. And I said, okay, if you ended up going to jail, contact me when you get out, and then we can sort of figure things out. Spending time with this young man changed my life. I spent 4 to 5 weeks teaching my class just for him. And it made me connect with my own humanity and the importance of looking past someone's past challenges. And by spending that time with him and then talking with this other student, it allowed me to go into the jail environment and teach. So, two quick points. One, I went into the jail environment as I started my nonprofit and was very apprehensive about doing it. My friends and family were pushing me towards that environment. And the first day that I went into a cell, a unit. And when I walked in the door, and I wasn't ready to go into a unit that day with all these men in correctional uniforms, I took less than 3 steps. And someone from about 20 to 25 years ago saw me and called my name. And it just sort of confirmed what I was doing. So again, the universe can sometimes tell us what we
Wow.
need to know. And then by spending that time with that student, it allowed me to free myself, to remove my fear, to be vulnerable. And vulnerability is not a bad thing. I wrote my story about how I went from almost failing high school to becoming a college professor. And by sitting down and writing your story and thinking about the things that have happened to you, you allow yourself to be free. So don't worry about vulnerability and being vulnerable by sharing your story. There's no issue with sharing your story. The issue is if you allow that story to be hidden inside and bother you and to hold you back. So just be open, share your story. It's your story, own it, but learn and grow from it.
And when you say writing your story, do you physically mean like sit down and learn to write out your story?
I think that it's very useful because when we think through it, we do it very quickly. We don't necessarily do it in a methodical way. But when you sit down and write your story, and I'm not saying that your story needs to be written to put it in a book to give someone, you could write it in a journal. But if you really want to work through some dark periods in your life, sit down and start writing. So, for example, when I wrote my book about my educational journey, Above Expectations, what happened was I didn't even realize how much emotional baggage I had about certain elements of my life because I wrote a particular chapter about my mom and I found myself almost crying. And then it helped me to sort of release some of that. The other thing that I didn't realize is how critical it was that I changed schools my junior year in reality, but actually my sophomore year, my second sophomore year, because I was on the verge of failing again. So what I learned was, what I learned was that sometimes we can be so close to failure, but if you stop, you fail. But if you keep moving forward, you move past whatever it is, even if you failed at that particular moment.
Wow, you're reminding me of a bunch of things from Fear and Outwitting the Devil. Have you read Outwitting the Devil by Napoleon Hill?
No, I haven't.
Oh man, you need to read that book. It's another one of the books on our Unstuckable reading list. But you've brought up a bunch of points that are very have been brought up by Napoleon Hill in that book, and it was a great read. I'd also like to say that in this one conversation, you have hit on probably 9 out of the 10 unstuckable habits that we talk about, and it's just amazing. I mean, I'm learning so much from you and why you are the way that you are. You are definitely unstuckable in my mind. You want to hear what the habits are and see? I would love to get your response on what we've outlined.
Sure, because you've intrigued me now.
Yeah. So Stephen and I have been working on these for a while, but I'll just be quick because I do want to get back to you. But practicing mindfulness, hanging out with like-minded people, purging and simplifying your life, gaining value by learning, tracking your finances. It's probably the only one I didn't think we'd talked about. We call it stacking your motivation. I think that that's very similar to what you talked about when it comes to not just scheduling, doing things when it's scheduled, but doing it when your mind is motivated to do it. Communicating your values and needs, embracing discomfort and fear, moving to gain perspective. And that could be exercise or physically moving your location where you're at. And then finally telling your story. And you have hit on all of those in your career story. And it's awesome. It's not very often that I talk to someone who is able to tell me stories about their life and their situations that they've been in such an articulate way.
Well, thank you very much, but I'm going to correct you just a little bit. Not in a bad way, but you said the one that I didn't cover was about tracking your financial assets.
Yeah.
But I did. Can you realize how I did that?
I want to know. Tell me.
Okay, so you don't have any ideas.
Maybe I missed it in our conversation.
I'm flipping the interview now.
I'm thinking back. Where was it? Where did that meet? Where did you think that you talked about finances?
Well, so I'm not talking about finances in traditional means, but I am talking about assets. So what I've described are my assets, my books, my works, my connection with individuals and sharing my story, the things that I'm passionate about in giving. So when I do a lot of tiebacks, if you've noticed, when we've had this conversation. And so where I said, I wrote that last chapter of my book, that was, happiness isn't what I thought it would be. So happiness isn't about money anymore.
Wow.
It's about my gift of giving back and sharing my experiences. And that has allowed me to emerge to an individual I never thought I could be.
I think it's awesome. I think that is, I have to agree with it. I think I've felt the same thing in my own career, having in my 20s, chased a higher and higher salary, and then learned that there was more, there were more to my values list than simply money, to an extent.
Oh, I've got to add this. I would not be the man that I am today and have helped the folks that have contacted me, have gone to my lectures, have listened to me online, and read my work, if I had not known who I was as a man, and if I hadn't known what my character is, because I walked away from lots of high paying jobs because of my value system. And a lot of individuals compromise their values because they say, I don't have a choice. Yes, you do have a choice. I made the choice to walk away from a high paying government job as a contractor because I wasn't doing any work. I walked away from a job where I was doing an independent audit because I was told to move the results, I'll say questionably manipulate the results to something that I didn't agree with. I walked away from jobs because folks treated me like trash, and I respect myself more than that.
Mm-hmm.
So we always have a choice.
I love it. Sly, thank you so much for spending time with us today. And would you like to help our listeners get unstuck?
Sure. How can I do that?
All right. I've got 3 questions for you. The first one is, what is one quick action our listeners can take if they're feeling stuck in their life to get unstuck?
Just get moving. Do not be afraid of doing something. Because here's the quick answer. All right, so here's the quick answer. So there's always value in the journey, even if the outcome isn't as you might want it to be.
I love it, man. Thank you. And I have 2 more for you. The second one is, what resources, you mentioned a bunch, and I can go back through the interview and make sure that I outline these in the notes, but what resources would you recommend that have helped you get unstuck?
Learning to not be afraid, learning to be vulnerable, and doing away with my ego.
Awesome. And finally, what does unstuckable mean to you?
Living a fulfilled life.
Wow, Sly, thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I know we're going to talk again because this conversation was just our introduction. Let's get unstuck.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. I mean, it doesn't feel like we've been on that long because I actually enjoy speaking with you. So let's definitely connect again in the future.
Thanks, man. Wow, man, that was awesome.